Welcome back. In this video, I'm going to give you an overview of JSP and servlets. We'll cover the following topics. We'll first find out what is a web application. Then we'll learn about JSP and servlets. And finally, I'll show you different types of apps you can create with JSP and servlets. So what we're going to do in this course is we're going to build web applications. So you may wonder, well, what is a web application? Well, you've used these before. If you've gone to any e-commerce site like Amazon or any travel site, you've used a web app. And it's basically a site that builds HTML pages on the fly based on your user actions. So I'll actually show you an example of this using one of the travel sites. So here's Expedia.com. I use this site a lot for travel. I travel a lot from Philadelphia to India. So here I'll enter my, where I'm flying from, where I'm flying to. I'll enter some dates here for my travel. And then the key here is that once I hit search, it's actually going to generate HTML pages for me based on my request. All right. So these pages that you see here, it's not a hard coded page. It's actually generated on the fly based on my input. Philadelphia going to Bangalore. All right, so you may wonder what happens behind the scenes. Well, behind the scenes is in the web browser, you select search flights, then it goes to the web server. What the web server will do is it'll actually submit a request to the database using SQL. And then once it has results, then it'll take that information and then send back an HTML page on the fly. And that's the idea of a web application. And this is actually very generic. You can build web apps using any type of technology, such as JSP or servlets, or .NET technologies, or PHP technologies, and so on. But that's the basic idea. And what I'll do in this course is I'll show you a very high level on how to get started with JSP for building pages. So that's the next question here. What are JSPs and servlets? Well, a JSP and servlet, they're basically Java code that runs on the web server. So they can read user input, normally from an HTML form, and then it can perform the work, maybe talking to a database, talking to a web service, or whatever. And finally, it'll return an HTML page that's generated dynamically on the fly. So kind of pulling it together with this big picture, our servlets and JSPs could actually run on the web server. So they could read information for flight information, send information over to the database, get the results, and then send back an HTML page. So that's kind of the area of where servlets and JSPs can fit in your web application architecture. All right, so here's another frequently asked question. Well, what types of apps can we create? Well, I always like to say that you can create apps for any industry. So you can build e-commerce apps. You could build maybe a student or employee tracking application. If you're building like a hotel or restaurant reservation app, or a social media app like Twitter or Facebook, really any type of app, there's really no limit on the apps you can create. JSP and servlets are the key components of the Java Enterprise Edition. They're the most popular pieces of technology, and I always like to say they're the bread and butter, because a lot of popular MVC frameworks actually use JSP and servlets. So for example, Spring, JSF, and Struts, they all use JSP and servlets at the low level. Now, when you're using these technologies, you may not see it directly at the high level, but behind the scenes, Spring, JSP, and Struts, they all make use of JSP and servlets. So they're the key components of the Java Enterprise Edition. So by you understanding JSP, this will help you when you move forward if you use some of those frameworks later on in your career. All right, so let's go ahead and wrap up this video. So we defined what are web applications. We saw a demo of a web app. We also discussed JSP and servlets. And then finally, we discussed the various types of apps you can create with this technology.